When I was thinking about this morning, I realized that inspiration comes from a multitude of different places. And my inspiration from this year came from a very unlikely source, Private Brian Monken. You see, Private Brian Monken had an argument with his wife one night, and he jumped in his car and sped away, 3 beers already under his belt. As his lieutenant, it was my lovely task to meet with him the next day after the MPs turned him over to me. And so I asked him why he hadn't called for help. He had so many friends in the unit, so many people ready to support him. Why drive drunk when any one of us would have come to pick you up in an instant? I'm a good soldier, was all he could say. And the truth is, he was. Within a few months of his arrival, Brian had mastered concepts that took other soldiers years to grasp. And by the time we deployed to Kuwait and Iraq together, he had much higher-ranking soldiers reporting to him, earning him the Bronze Star Medal as well as the unquestioned respect of his peers. But unfortunately, Brian thought that being a good soldier also meant not asking for help, which for one evening, and thank goodness no one was hurt, made him a bad soldier when he jeopardized the lives of the very citizens he had sworn to protect. But if I'm going to be honest with you, and I probably should, it's Yom Kippur after all, it's kind of hard to blame him. Like Brian and so many others, I too sometimes felt like I had nowhere to turn to for assistance, even when there were literally dozens of people waiting to help. When a cascade of divorces and family separations befell my soldiers on our first deployment, I was overwhelmed with guilt. It was my job to safeguard my soldiers' well-being, and I had failed. For a time, I became someone else. Miserable, pessimistic, despondent. And I remember I was smoking my very first and very last cigarette when Sergeant Tim Groh approached me and said, "Could you just tell me what's going on, sir? Because, 1, you look really stupid with that cigarette in your mouth. And 2, we really need you to be you again." That's how I learned the dangers of trying to be the good soldier. Because it requires deeds of stunning bravery, the United States military encourages a dismissive approach to vulnerability, one designed to render soldiers insusceptible to the very real doubts that accompany grave danger. The model soldier achieves success by disregarding all human frailty and remaining composed, regardless of circumstances, enabling her to accomplish feats she never dreamed possible. And it works. It works so well. Jumping from a plane at 800 feet? Simple. Sliding down a 100-foot rope dangling from a helicopter? In training conditions? Come on. Patrolling contested battle space for 2 days with 80 pounds of gear on 4 hours sleep? It's just another day at the office. Sometimes it seems like there's nothing you cannot achieve when you're numb to your fragility. Except that is, talk about your fragility, and therein lies the rub. If the model soldier achieves success by remaining composed regardless of circumstances, then disclosing our shortcomings represents a tacit admission of failure. Good soldiers don't have self-doubts. Good soldiers are never afraid. And good soldiers certainly don't call their CO at 2 a.m. because they had a spat with their spouse and don't know what to do about it. And so, a bright young man and a wonderful soldier who should have felt the warm embrace of his comrades instead suffered in silence, all because he failed to measure up to the fantasy of invincibility that had been so carefully constructed for him. And he's not alone. The quest for invulnerability that shrouds the lives of our uniformed personnel in isolation and doubt saturates the very fabric of American society. It's in our schools and our workplaces. It's on our televisions and our movie screens. It's in our video games and our magazines, our newspapers and our politics. In fact, I dare say it's right here in this very room. How many of us feel like we can't admit to others when we're facing financial difficulties, or when we're facing health problems, or when we're worried about our children, or don't know how we're going to care for our aging parents, or when we're lonely, or when our marriage is falling apart, or when we don't feel smart enough, or talented enough, or wealthy enough, or sophisticated enough, or pretty enough? How many of us suffer in silence while struggling to be the good soldier? From self-doubts fostered by competitiveness and individualism to judgments placed upon us by others, we all experience significant pressures to conceal our vulnerabilities. And the ever-increasing time we spend living our lives online compounds these pressures, inviting new sources of disappointment and shame right into the palms of our hand. The limitless catalog of carefully curated selfies and implausibly impeccable achievements we carry in our pockets continually reminds us of the ever-alluring, yet always unattainable paradigm of perfection. But whether we acknowledge it or not, vulnerability is an integral component of human life, one that our tradition encourages us to embrace wholeheartedly during these days of awe. As our prayers today remind us, we are but creatures of flesh and blood, whose beginning and end are little more than dust. Regardless of our income, our success, or our accolades, we all pass as equals underneath the great shepherd's rod, all flawed, all at the mercy of circumstances much bigger than ourselves, circumstances we cannot hope to comprehend, despite the invulnerability we endeavor to portray. We're human. If you prick us, we bleed. If you poison us, we die. What's more, as the famous researcher Brene Brown suggests, either you do vulnerability knowingly or vulnerability does you. Concealing our vulnerabilities requires keeping secrets that prevent us from being loved and cherished for who we truly are, denying us the connectedness we so desperately need and so richly deserve. In a 2012 study of couples at East Carolina University, researchers discovered that more than 60% of married respondents kept significant secrets from their own spouses. Now, these weren't casual secrets like how long you spend online during the day or how often you use a towel before throwing it in the laundry. These were significant secrets. Hidden debts, undisclosed bank accounts, prior marriages, addictions, even suicidal thoughts. The suffering these secrets will ultimately inflict upon an unsuspecting spouse, as well as the suffering inflicted daily upon those keeping them hidden, is simply unfathomable. Our spirits weren't meant to bear the weight of the armor of secrecy we put on each day before going to work, before going to school, for some of us before going home. And so we resort to precarious anesthetics to numb ourselves to what we're doing. Binging in television, video games, or social media, compulsive shopping or eating, gambling, drinking, even narcotics. In fact, Brown suggests that our desire to escape our inadequacies has led us to become the most in-debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in United States history. So while American society encourages us to strive for invincibility, we clearly must find a way to acknowledge our imperfections and embrace them. It takes real bravery to stop hiding the things we like the least about ourselves and risk the uncertainty and embarrassment that can result from admitting our vulnerabilities But at its core, that's precisely what courage is. Throughout 16 years of military service, I was privileged to meet some of the greatest soldiers our armed forces have to offer, from staff clerks to Congressional Medal of Honor winners. And they all shared one thing in common. They experienced the full spectrum of emotions, from pride to joy to fear to sadness to loneliness. And they're willing to share it all. They share their closest truths with their teammates in the hopes of seeing one another and being seen by one another, so that each knows exactly what rests on his left or right flank. The bravest among us know and acknowledge just how vulnerable they truly are. And if we wish to escape the perils imposed upon us by our society's quest for invulnerability, then we must create spaces where we and our loved ones can do the same. In fact, this is exactly what our tradition demands. On this day of judgment, we come stripped of our pleasures, our possessions, and our accomplishments. We enjoy neither food nor bath. We remove our ornate decorations, our leather, our perfumes, and appear before God and our community at our most vulnerable, flawed individuals with no claim to redemption other than our potential to repent. But creating a place where people can safely disclose their vulnerabilities and be celebrated for who they are requires far more from us than the courage to disclose our vulnerabilities and imperfections. It also requires from us the courage to accept others' vulnerabilities and imperfections. Marjorie, a recovering alcoholic, spent years working up the courage to share her past with her neighbor. And when she did, her neighbor replied, "I'm not sure I'm comfortable having my children play at your house anymore." Pushing through her shame and her fear, Marjorie responded, "But they've played together for years, and I've been sober for more than 25 years. I'm no different than I was 10 minutes ago. Why are you?" Our pursuit of invulnerability has become so ubiquitous that we often perpetuate it ruthlessly, if unwittingly, by condemning others when they dare to reveal their vulnerable selves. But if we wish to make this place a sanctuary where people can come to see and be seen, if we wish to make this place a home where everyone can truly be themselves, then we must acknowledge our complicity in reinforcing the pursuit of perfection and relinquish our tendency towards judgment. Each year, the Hasidic legend, the Baal Shem Tov, held a competition to select the very best shofar blower for his Rosh Hashanah service. But if you wanted to blow the shofar for the Baal Shem Tov, not only did you have to blow the shofar with gusto, dazzling the likes of anyone who came to pray, you also had to learn a vast array of kavanot, quiet, complex prayers said before the blowing of the shofar to direct its blast toward the proper effect in the divine realm. Prospective shofar blowers would practice these kavanot for months, some for years before auditioning. When one such man came before the Baal Shem Tov, he realized that none of his preparations had adequately equipped him to stand before the greatest rabbi of his generation and perform this ritual. So he choked. His mind froze. He couldn't remember the kavanot. He stood before the Baal Shem Tov in utter silence. And then, when he realized just how egregiously he failed, his heart broke, his body heaved, and he wept. "All right," said the Baal Shem Tov, "you're hired." By rewarding the shofar blower's vulnerable expression, the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that we achieve our greatest successes not by pursuing our fantasy of invulnerability, but by daring to reveal our vulnerable selves within a community that accepts them with open arms. When we have that kind of community, then no one among us need ever suffer in silence while struggling to be the good soldier. May this be the blessing we give to our loved ones and to this community in the coming year. Shana Tova, Ugmar Chatima Tova.